The stars have always been patient teachers. They burn for billions of years, illuminating nothing but the cold vacuum between worlds, and yet they persist. They do not rage against the emptiness. They do not demand recognition. They simply endure, casting their light into the void with the quiet confidence that eventually, somewhere, something will look up and wonder.
Ambassador Ketharani Valsoreth had spent 412 standard years serving the conclave of ascended civilizations, and in all that time she had never once considered what the stars might think of the beings who traveled between them. Such contemplation was beneath her station.
She was Velkari, one of the eldest races to achieve sentience in this arm of the galaxy, descendants of a civilization that had mapped the cosmic web when humanity's ancestors were still learning to chip stones into crude tools.
Now, standing at the observation port of the Conclave's primary deliberation station, she found herself staring at those ancient lights and feeling something she had not experienced in centuries.
Fear. The station orbited a dying star in the neutral territories, a region of space claimed by no single power, administered by the conclave itself. The Velkari had helped design this station 4,000 years ago, when the great powers of the galaxy first agreed that some matters required collective deliberation. Its halls had witnessed treaties that ended wars spanning centuries. Its chambers had echoed with the voices of species now long extinct.
Today, those halls were nearly silent. The delegations that had once filled them with the vibrant chaos of 100 different languages and customs had been reduced to a handful of exhausted representatives, most of them too shell-shocked to speak.
Ketharani's reflection stared back at her from the reinforced viewport, tall and slender, her blue-gray skin marked with the ceremonial patterns of her caste, her 4 eyes dulled with an exhaustion that no amount of rest could cure. She had been beautiful once, by the standards of her people. Now she simply looked old. Behind her, the door to the observation deck whispered open.
Ambassador Valsoreth. The voice belonged to Prime Coordinator Thesson, the highest-ranking member of the Conclave's administrative body. His species, the Rithani, communicated partially through bioluminescent patterns that rippled across their translucent bodies. Right now, those patterns pulsed with barely contained anxiety. The emergency session will convene in 20 cycles. Your presence is expected.
Expected, Ketharani repeated, not turning from the viewport. An interesting choice of words, Coordinator. Not requested, not required. Expected.
Thesson's lights flickered in what she recognized as discomfort. These are unprecedented times, Ambassador. The Conclave looks to its senior members for guidance.
Guidance? A sound escaped her throat, not quite a laugh, but close enough to make Thesson's patterns flare with surprise. 3 cycles ago, we received confirmation that the hegemony of righteous expansion has conquered the Vorthan Confederacy. 42 inhabited worlds, 18 billion sentient beings now subject to forced integration or extermination. And you speak to me of guidance?
The silence stretched between them like the space between stars. The situation is dire, Thesson admitted finally. But there may yet be options we have not considered.
Options? Ketharani finally turned to face him, and even after centuries of diplomatic training, she could not quite keep the bitterness from her voice. The hegemony has been expanding for 60 years. In that time, they have absorbed or annihilated 17 member civilizations of this conclave. They have ignored every sanction, violated every treaty, and laughed at every attempt at diplomatic resolution. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They consume.
Which is precisely why we must—
Must what? She stepped closer, and despite his greater physical mass, Thesson retreated slightly. Must convene another session, pass another resolution, issue another strongly worded condemnation that the hegemony will use as fuel for their propaganda engines?
Vessen's bioluminescence dimmed to almost nothing, the Rithani equivalent of a whisper. There is a proposal on the agenda, one that has never been seriously considered before.
Catharani's secondary eyes narrowed. Explain.
Ambassador Kethvoris of the Merchant Combine has put forward a motion. Given the existential nature of the current crisis, he is proposing that we seek external assistance.
External? From whom? Every major power in this sector is either already a member of the conclave, aligned with the hegemony, or too weak to make a difference.
The Thesson's lights pulsed in a complex pattern she couldn't quite read. Not every power, Ambassador. There is one civilization we have deliberately excluded from these proceedings, one species we have consistently voted to isolate from galactic affairs.
Understanding struck her like a physical blow. No.
Ambassador.
Absolutely not. Catharani's voice rose sharper than she had intended. The humans are quarantined for good reason. They are unstable, unpredictable, and dangerously aggressive. Every assessment conducted by the Institute for Xenological Studies has concluded that integration with galactic society would be catastrophically destabilizing.
Those assessments were conducted over 2 centuries ago, Ambassador. The humans have changed significantly since then. Have they? Or have they simply become better at hiding their true nature?
Thesson had no answer to that, and Catharani turned back to the viewport, her mind racing through implications she did not want to consider. The humans. Of all the solutions the conclave could propose, they wanted to involve the humans.
She remembered the first reports, transmitted across the network nearly 3 centuries ago. A new species had achieved faster-than-light travel, always a moment of great interest to the elder civilizations. Scouts were dispatched to make discreet observations, to assess whether the newcomers might eventually be suitable for contact and integration.
What those scouts found had troubled the conclave deeply.
The humans had not achieved FTL travel through careful, methodical research spanning millennia, as most species did. They had done it in less than 2 centuries after first achieving powered flight. Their technological development was not a gentle curve, it was a violent spike, an almost vertical ascent that defied every model of civilizational progression the conclave had ever developed.
More disturbing still was their history. The Velkari had spent 3,000 years in their pre-contact phase, gradually unifying their world through diplomacy and cultural exchange. The humans had nearly exterminated themselves at least 3 times before reaching the stars. They had developed weapons capable of rendering their homeworld uninhabitable, and they had come within moments of using them.
They had fought wars of such brutality that the xenopsychologists studying them had required therapeutic intervention.
And yet they had survived. They had survived everything. Ice ages, plagues, world wars, nuclear standoffs, climate disasters, and a near-extinction event caused by an asteroid impact engineered by their own mining corporations. They had survived, and they had kept reaching for the stars with a persistence that bordered on pathological. The conclave had voted to quarantine them. Not out of malice, the official records insisted, but out of prudent concern for galactic stability. The humans were given a generous territory, 4 star systems, more than enough for a young species, and firmly informed that they were not welcome in the broader galactic community. Trade was restricted. Cultural exchange was forbidden. The humans were to be left alone until they had matured sufficiently to be trusted.
That had been 218 years ago.
Ambassador, Thessen's voice pulled her back to the present. The session will begin soon. Whatever your personal feelings about the proposal, your voice carries weight. The other delegates will look to you.
Catharani closed her primary eyes and allowed herself a moment of pure, undignified exhaustion. She was tired, so deeply, profoundly tired. She had spent her entire career believing that wisdom and patience could resolve any conflict, that the accumulated knowledge of ancient civilizations would always find a way forward. Now the hegemony was burning its way across the galaxy, and all that accumulated wisdom had proven utterly worthless. "I will attend," she said finally, "but I will not support this madness. The humans are not the answer. They cannot be the answer."
Thessen's lights pulsed acknowledgment, and he departed without another word.
Catharani remained at the viewport, watching the stars burn their patient light into the void, and tried not to think about the reports she had read, reports that even most conclave members had never seen, reports about what the humans had done to the pirates who had raided their colony on Proxima IV, reports about the efficiency with which they had dismantled an incursion by hegemony scouts who had strayed too close to their borders. Reports about the thing they called the contingency fleet, which they had apparently been building in secret for over a century, hidden in the outer reaches of their quarantine zone. She did not know what the humans had become during their 2 centuries of isolation. She was not certain she wanted to find out. But as she made her way toward the deliberation chamber, she could not shake the feeling that the galaxy was about to find out whether it wanted to or not. The chamber was smaller than it had been designed to be. Temporary walls had been erected to partition off sections that were no longer needed, sections that had once housed delegations from civilizations that no longer existed. The Vorthan seats sat empty now, their holographic nameplates still glowing with the gentle amber light of a people who had been free just 3 cycles ago. Catharani took her position at the Velkari delegation's assigned station, nodding brief acknowledgement to the handful of colleagues who had managed to attend. There were supposed to be 12 representatives from her government at any given session. Today, there were 3, and one of them had clearly not slept in days. The chamber itself held perhaps 40 delegates, representing the remnants of what had once been the most powerful deliberative body in the known galaxy. Some species had sent only junior diplomats, their senior members recalled home to deal with crises too immediate for interstellar politics. Others had sent no one at all, their communication channels gone silent, their fates unknown. Prime Coordinator Thessen took his position at the central podium, his bioluminescent patterns cycling through the formal sequence that signaled the opening of deliberations. Around the chamber, translation systems hummed to life, converting his words into the dozens of languages still represented. "This emergency session of the Conclave of Ascended Civilizations is now convened," he announced. "We gather in a time of unprecedented crisis. The hegemony of righteous expansion continues its campaign of conquest, and our conventional responses have proven insufficient." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Insufficient. Such a mild word for such a catastrophic failure. "Before us is a proposal from the Merchant Combine, formally submitted by Ambassador Kethvoris. The proposal calls for the immediate lifting of all sanctions against the species known as humanity, and for the dispatch of a diplomatic mission to request their assistance in the current conflict." The murmur became something louder. Catharani could see delegates leaning toward each other, their translators struggling to keep up with the sudden burst of crosstalk.
This proposal is irregular, Thesson continued, his lights pulsing with forced calm. It would require a 2/3 majority to pass, and it would fundamentally alter our relationship with a species that has been deliberately excluded from galactic affairs for over 2 centuries. However, given the nature of our current crisis, the Coordinator's office has agreed to allow full debate.
He gestured toward a portly figure seated at the Merchant Combine's station. Ambassador Kethvoris, you may present your proposal.
Kethvoris rose slowly, his amphibious bulk shifting with obvious discomfort. The Combine's representatives were merchants and traders, not warriors or diplomats. They dealt in goods, not words. But desperate times had thrust them into an unfamiliar role.
Honored colleagues, he began, his voice rough with an accent that no translator could quite smooth away. I will not waste your time with pleasantries. We are dying, all of us. The hegemony does not negotiate, does not compromise, does not stop. In 60 years, they have grown from a minor regional power to the largest military force in the known galaxy. They have conquered 32 civilizations. They have killed billions.
And we, his voice cracked slightly, we have done nothing but watch.
He paused, collecting himself. Our sanctions have failed. Our diplomatic missions have been slaughtered. Our combined military forces were routed at the Battle of Thesser's Gate, with losses exceeding 90%. We have nothing left. No weapons, no strategies, no hope.
Except one.
His eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gazes of delegates from a dozen different species. 2 centuries ago, we discovered a species that frightened us. Not because they threatened us, they had barely achieved interstellar travel. They frightened us because of what they were, what they had survived, what they had done to themselves and each other in the process of clawing their way off their dying world. We called them unstable, aggressive, dangerous. And we were right. They are all of those things. But colleagues, I submit to you that right now, dangerous is exactly what we need. A delegate from the Synthark Collective rose without waiting to be recognized. Ambassador Kethvoris, with respect, you are proposing that we unleash a species we deliberately quarantined because we believed they posed a threat to galactic stability. How does adding another destabilizing force solve our current problem? Because the humans hate the hegemony. Silence fell across the chamber.
17 years ago, Kethvoris continued, a hegemony scouting force violated human space. They destroyed a mining station in the outer reaches of the Proxima system. 47 human workers were killed. The hegemony commander transmitted a message demanding human submission and tribute.
He paused, and something that might have been grim satisfaction flickered across his amphibious features. The humans responded by tracking that scouting force back to its staging base, a military installation the hegemony had established in the unclaimed reaches. They did not send a message. They did not issue demands. They simply appeared, destroyed the installation and every ship within 3 light years of it, and then returned to their space without a word. The hegemony has not entered human territory since. Catharani found herself leaning forward despite herself. She had read about the Proxima incident, but the official reports had been vague about the details. The humans had responded to an attack. The hegemony had declined to escalate. That was all the records showed. How many ships did the humans deploy? The question came from a Velkari colleague, his voice carefully neutral.
According to our intelligence sources, 12.
The chamber erupted. 12 ships. The Hegemony staging base had been defended by at least 200 vessels, along with orbital weapon platforms and ground-based defense installations. The idea that 12 ships could have destroyed such a target was absurd. And yet the Hegemony had never returned to human space.
Order! Thessan's lights flared brilliant white, the Rithani's signal for silence. Order, please. Ambassador Keth Voris, you will have the opportunity to provide evidence for your claims. For now, please conclude your initial presentation.
Keth Voris nodded, his bulk settling back slightly. I will conclude with this. The humans owe us nothing. We abandoned them. We isolated them. We treated them as dangerous animals to be contained rather than potential partners to be cultivated. If we approach them now, asking for help, they have every right to refuse.
But I do not believe they will.
Because for all their violence, for all their chaos, for all the things that frightened us about them, the humans have one quality that we have always underestimated. They remember. They remember every slight, every betrayal, every injustice. But they also remember every kindness, every moment of grace, every hand extended in genuine friendship. We extended no such hand, but the Hegemony extended something far worse. They extended death, and the humans will not forget that.
He sat down heavily, his presentation complete.
Thessan allowed a moment of silence before speaking. The floor is now open for debate. Ambassador Val Soreth, you indicated earlier that you wished to speak in opposition. Do you still wish to do so? Catharani rose slowly, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. She had prepared arguments, logical, reasonable, well-supported arguments about the risks of involving an unpredictable species in an already volatile conflict. She had statistics about human violence, psychological profiles suggesting deep-seated aggressive tendencies, historical analyses of their many, many wars. But standing there, looking out at the desperate faces of delegates whose worlds were burning, whose people were dying, whose civilizations were being erased from the galaxy, she found that the words would not come. She paused, gathered herself. I have served this conclave for over 4 centuries. In that time I have seen crises come and go. I have seen wars end and peace prevail. I have always believed that patience and wisdom would see us through any darkness.
She looked at the empty Vorthan seats, their amber glow a memorial to 18 billion souls now trapped under hegemony control.
I no longer believe that. The chamber stirred, delegates exchanging uncertain glances. Ambassador Val Soreth, the senior Velkari representative, the voice of caution and tradition, was changing her position in real time. I came here intending to oppose this proposal, to argue that the humans are too dangerous, too unstable, too unpredictable to be trusted with a role in galactic affairs. And perhaps I am right. Perhaps involving them will lead to consequences we cannot foresee. But I have realized something in these last moments. We are already facing consequences we cannot survive. The hegemony will not stop. They will continue to expand until every civilization in this galaxy is either absorbed or destroyed, including the humans, including us. We quarantined humanity because we were afraid of what they might become. Perhaps it is time to stop being afraid and start being hopeful instead.
She sat down, and the chamber erupted into chaos.
The debate raged for hours. Delegates argued, pleaded, threatened, and in at least one case wept openly as they recounted the fates of worlds they had failed to protect. Old grudges were aired, ancient alliances were tested. The conclave, designed to function through consensus and careful deliberation, strained at the seams under the pressure of existential desperation.
In the end, the vote was not close.
87% of the assembled delegates voted in favor of lifting the sanctions on humanity. 87% voted to send a diplomatic mission. 87% voted to beg for help from a species they had dismissed as primitive and dangerous for over 2 centuries.
Catharani watched the results display with a mixture of hope and dread. They had done it. They had opened a door that had been sealed for 200 years.
Now they could only wait to see what came through. The diplomatic vessel was not Velkari, which surprised her. The conclave had selected a neutral transport, a Rathani courier ship modified for long-range travel, and staffed it with representatives from 7 different member species. Catharani had been chosen to lead the delegation, a decision she suspected had more to do with her dramatic reversal during the debate than with any particular diplomatic skill.
The journey to human space took 11 standard days. 11 days of traveling through increasingly empty space, passing through regions that had once bustled with commerce and now lay silent and dark. The hegemony's advance had not reached this far yet, but its shadow stretched ahead of it, driving traders and travelers away from the threatened sectors. They reached the boundary of human space on the 12th day, and Catharani found herself standing at the viewport once again, staring at the stars that marked the edge of the quarantine zone.
There was nothing visible at the boundary. No defensive stations, no patrol ships, no signs of the supposedly primitive civilization they had come to beg for help. Just empty space and distant stars, same as everywhere else.
And yet she could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. Ambassador, the ship's captain, a nervous Rathani named Thesic, approached with lights pulsing uncertainty. "We are receiving a transmission. It is in Galactic Standard." Catharani blinked all 4 of her eyes. Galactic Standard was the common trade language of the conclave, developed over millennia of cultural exchange. The humans had been isolated for over 2 centuries. They should not have had access to current linguistic databases.
"Put it through," she said.
The voice that filled the observation deck was calm and measured, speaking standard with an accent she could not quite place. "Attention, unidentified vessel. You are approaching the territorial boundary of the United Earth Commonwealth. State your identity and purpose, or alter course immediately." The captain looked to Catharani, his lights flickering with barely contained panic. She stepped forward, activating the ship's communication system.
This is Ambassador Catharani Valsorith, representing the Conclave of Ascended Civilizations. We come bearing a formal diplomatic communication for your government. We request permission to enter your space and meet with your representatives.
Silence. Then, "Stand by." The transmission cut off, leaving them in silence once more. Minutes passed, then an hour. Catharani remained at the viewport, watching the empty stars, trying not to count the time. Finally, the transmission resumed. "Ambassador Valsorith, your request has been received. You are cleared to proceed to the following coordinates. An escort will meet you at the designated location. Do not deviate from the provided course. Do not attempt to scan or record any installations you may observe. Failure to comply with these instructions will result in immediate expulsion from Commonwealth space."
The voice paused, and when it resumed, there was something different in its tone, something almost curious.
"Welcome to human space, Ambassador. We've been expecting you."
The coordinates led them to a station unlike anything Catherine had ever seen.
It was not impressive in the way that Valkyrie installations were impressive. No graceful curves, no artistic flourishes, no visible effort to project power or status. It was a purely functional structure, all sharp angles and exposed infrastructure, designed for efficiency rather than aesthetics.
And it was enormous. The main body of the station stretched for dozens of kilometers, ringed by docking bays large enough to accommodate capital ships. Industrial facilities clung to its exterior like barnacles, their purpose unclear, but their scale unmistakable. The whole structure pulsed with a quiet, constant rhythm of activity, ships coming and going, cargo being loaded and unloaded, workers moving across external scaffolding in suits designed for hard vacuum.
But it was the ships that truly caught her attention. There were hundreds of them, arranged in precise formation around the station. Not the crude, primitive vessels that the old intelligence reports had described. These were sleek, purpose-built warships, their hulls dark and angular, their weapon arrays hidden but somehow unmistakable. They moved with a coordination that spoke of centuries of practice, each ship knowing its place in a pattern too complex for her to fully comprehend.
"Ambassador," Captain Thesic's voice had gone very quiet. "Our sensors are detecting significant military assets in this system. Significant. I don't know how to describe this. Our databases have no comparable references."
"How many ships, Captain?"
"In this system alone? Over 3,000. She felt something cold settle in her chest. 3,000 ships. In a single system. The Conclave's combined military forces at their peak had numbered less than 2,000 combat-capable vessels across all member species.
And these were not peak times. The escort ships arrived without warning, 3 small vessels that materialized from empty space as if they had simply decided to exist. They took up positions around the diplomatic ship without communication, guiding it toward a docking bay with the silent efficiency of beings who had done this countless times before.
As they entered the station, Catharani caught a glimpse of something massive moving in the darkness beyond the construction yards. A ship? A station? She could not tell. It was too large for her mind to properly comprehend, a shadow against the stars that seemed to go on forever.
And then they were inside, and she could see nothing but the functional gray walls of the docking bay.
The humans who met them were not what she had expected. The old reports had described a species of contradictions, violent and creative, destructive and resilient, capable of both tremendous cruelty and extraordinary compassion. They had painted a picture of chaos barely contained, of a civilization always one wrong step away from self-annihilation.
The people standing in the docking bay looked nothing like that description.
They were calm. That was the first thing she noticed. They stood in neat formation, wearing uniforms of muted gray and blue, watching the diplomatic delegation disembark with expressions of polite, patient interest. No weapons were visible, but she had the distinct impression that weapons were very close at hand.
At their head stood a woman of perhaps 50 years by human standards, her dark hair streaked with gray, her face marked by the kind of lines that came from long experience and heavy responsibility. She wore the same uniform as the others, but something in her bearing marked her as someone of significance.
"Ambassador Valsorath," she said, stepping forward with a slight inclination of her head. "I'm Admiral Chen Wei-Lin, commanding officer of Deep Space Station Prometheus. On behalf of the United Earth Commonwealth, I welcome you to human space."
Her galactic standard was flawless,
carrying none of the awkwardness that usually marked non-native speakers.
Admiral Chen. Catharani returned the gesture as best she could, adapting the human form of greeting. Thank you for receiving us. I must confess, your station is not what I expected.
A slight smile crossed the Admiral's weathered features. We've had 2 centuries to develop without interference, Ambassador. We made good use of the time.
There was something in her tone, not hostility exactly, but a cool awareness of history that made Catharani suddenly conscious of her role in maintaining the quarantine that had isolated these people for so long. We understand that you have a diplomatic communication for our government, Admiral Chen continued. President Okonkwo has authorized me to receive you as her representative. If you'll follow me, we have prepared a conference room for discussions.
The delegation fell in behind the Admiral as she led them into the station. Catharani walked at the front, her 4 eyes taking in every detail of the environment around her.
The corridors were clean and functional, marked with signage in a human script she did not recognize, but whose meaning was somehow clear. Crew members passed them with curious glances but no apparent alarm, going about their duties with quiet efficiency. The whole station hummed with a sense of purpose that she found both impressive and slightly unnerving. These were not the chaotic, unstable primitives of the old intelligence reports. These were people who knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of.
Admiral, she said as they walked, I notice that your people speak Galactic Standard with considerable fluency. I was not aware that you had access to current linguistic databases.
We didn't originally. Admiral Chen glanced back with that same slight smile. But isolation encourages resourcefulness. We've been monitoring galactic communications for about 150 years now. Long-range observation, signal intercepts, that sort of thing. Your encryption is quite good, but nothing is unbreakable with enough time and processing power.
Catharani processed this information with growing unease. 150 years. The humans had been listening to everything, every diplomatic transmission, every military communication, every piece of news and intelligence that had passed through the galactic networks for 150 years. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, the Admiral continued, her tone conversational. But when someone puts a fence around your house and tells you to stay inside, you tend to get curious about what's happening on the other side.
A reasonable perspective, Catharani managed.
We thought so. The conference room was modest by conclave standards. A simple table surrounded by chairs adapted from multiple species with large view screens dominating the walls. The delegation took their seats, with Catharani at the head, while Admiral Chen settled into a position across from them.
For a long moment, no one spoke.
Then Admiral Chen folded her hands on the table and met Catharani's gaze directly. Let me save us both some time, Ambassador. We know why you're here. We've been watching the hegemonies advance for decades. We've seen what happens to the Vorthon Confederacy. We know you've run out of options, and we're the last door you haven't knocked on.
She paused, letting that sink in. What I want to know is, why should we care?
The question hung in the air like an accusation. Catharani felt the eyes of her fellow delegates upon her, waiting for the carefully prepared diplomatic speech that would somehow convince these isolated, abandoned people to risk their lives for a galaxy that had turned its back on them. But looking at Admiral Chen's steady gaze, she realized that any prepared speech would be worse than useless. This woman had listened to their communications for a century and a half. She knew every lie, every evasion, every diplomatic trick in the Conclave's arsenal.
Only the truth had any chance of working.
You shouldn't, Catharani said.
The Admiral's eyebrows rose slightly. Behind her, a young human officer shifted in visible surprise. "You shouldn't care," Catharani continued. "We isolated you. We declared you dangerous and unstable. We denied you access to technologies that could have accelerated your development by centuries. We left you alone in the dark while we congratulated ourselves on our wisdom and caution. When the hegemony attacked your people at Proxima, we did nothing. When they established staging bases on your borders, we said nothing. We treated you as a problem to be contained, not as potential partners to be cultivated." She spread her hands, a gesture of helplessness that was almost universal among spacefaring species.
We were wrong. We were fools. And now we come to you in our desperation, offering nothing but the acknowledgement of our failures and a plea for mercy we do not deserve.
Admiral Chen studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "That's the first honest thing anyone from the Conclave has ever said to us." She leaned back in her chair, her posture shifting subtly from confrontational to thoughtful. "I appreciate that, Ambassador, more than you know."
But I'm not the one you need to convince.
She touched a control on the table, and a view screen behind her flickered to life. A new face appeared, a woman with dark skin and close-cropped gray hair, wearing the formal attire of a civilian leader. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and tired in a way that Catharani recognized intimately.
"Ambassador Valsereth," the woman said. "I'm Amara Okonkwo, President of the United Earth Commonwealth. I've been listening to your conversation with Admiral Chen."
She paused, and something that might have been dark humor flickered across her features. "You have my attention." The conversation with President Okonkwo lasted for hours. The human leader asked questions that cut to the heart of the Conclave's failures, not accusingly, but with the precision of someone who had spent years studying an enemy. She wanted to know about the hegemony's military capabilities, their command structure, their weaknesses. She wanted to know about the Conclave's remaining resources, their defensive positions, their ability to sustain a prolonged conflict.
She wanted to know everything, and Catharani found herself answering with a completeness that would have horrified her diplomatic training. There was something about the president's calm, focused attention that made evasion feel not just unwise, but somehow shameful.
When the interrogation finally ended, President Okonkwo sat in silence for a long moment, her eyes distant.
32 civilizations, she said finally. Hundreds of billions of sentient beings dead, enslaved, or living under occupation. And all of it could have been prevented if the Conclave had acted decisively in the first decade of the hegemony's expansion.
Yes. There was nothing else Catharani could say.
"We watched it happen." The president's voice was quiet, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. "For 60 years, we watched your worlds burn while you debated and negotiated and passed resolutions that everyone knew would never be enforced. We watched the hegemony grow stronger with every conquest, fed by the resources of the civilizations they consumed.
And we prepared." She leaned forward, her eyes meeting Catharani's through the view screen. "We didn't prepare because we wanted to save you, Ambassador. We prepared because we knew that eventually the hegemony would come for us, too. Everything we built, every ship, every weapon, every soldier, it was all designed for the day when we would have to fight for our own survival. But we've had time to think in our isolation, time to consider what kind of galaxy we want to exist in. And we've decided that we don't want to survive in a galaxy ruled by the hegemony's vision of order through conquest."
She sat back, and for the first time, something like warmth entered her expression.
So yes, Ambassador, we'll help you. Not because you deserve it, you don't. Not because we've forgiven you, we haven't. We'll help you because the alternative is a galaxy where species like the hegemony dictate the terms of existence for everyone else.
And that is not acceptable to us. Ketharani felt tears forming in her secondary eyes, an involuntary response that she could not have suppressed if she tried. President Akoho, I do not have the words. You don't need words, Ambassador. You need to go back to your conclave and tell them to get out of our way. The president's expression hardened into something that made Catharani's instincts scream warnings. Because the hegemony attacked our people. They killed our citizens. And for 17 years we've been waiting for the right moment to respond. That moment has arrived. The journey back to the conclave station felt longer than the journey out. Catharani spent most of it staring at the viewports, watching the stars pass by and trying to process everything she had witnessed. Before their departure, Admiral Chen had given them a tour of Station Prometheus. She had shown them the shipyards where vessels were being assembled with an efficiency that bordered on impossible. She had shown them the training facilities where human soldiers prepared for combat with a focus that was almost meditative. She had shown them the command center where tactical displays tracked the movements of human fleets across their territory. And she had given them numbers. The United Earth Commonwealth maintained a standing navy of over 8,000 vessels. Not the crude, primitive ships of the old intelligence reports. These were purpose-built warships, equipped with technologies that the Conclave scientists could not fully analyze from observation alone. Their smallest patrol craft carried weapons comparable to Conclave cruisers. Their capital ships were something else entirely. But it was not the numbers that had shaken Catharani to her core. It was the way the humans had presented them. There had been no boasting, no displays of pride or arrogance. Admiral Chen had recited the statistics with the same calm efficiency that characterized everything else about her people. These are our capabilities. This is what we can do. We thought you should know. The Conclave had quarantined humanity because they feared what the humans might become. Looking back on that decision now, Catharani could only marvel at their short-sightedness. They had not prevented humanity from becoming dangerous. They had simply ensured that when humanity revealed its strength, it would be as strangers rather than as allies. The emergency session convened within hours of their return. Delegates who had been scattered across the station came rushing to the deliberation chamber, their urgency palpable. Word had already begun to spread. The diplomatic mission had returned, and the humans had given an answer. Catharani stood at the central podium, looking out at the assembled representatives of a dying civilization, and tried to find the words to explain what she had seen. The United Earth Commonwealth has agreed to assist us, she began. Their president has committed to deploying military forces against the hegemony. A ripple of relief passed through the chamber. Delegates slumped in their seats, some openly weeping. After so many cycles of unrelenting bad news, any positive development felt like salvation. However, Catharani continued, and the chamber grew silent once more, I must convey certain conditions. The Commonwealth is not joining the Conclave. They are not placing themselves under our authority or coordinating their actions with our remaining military forces. They have made it clear that they will conduct this campaign according to their own strategies and timetables. A delegate from the Synthorc Collective rose. Ambassador, are you saying that the humans intend to operate as an independent force, without coordination or oversight?
I am saying, Ketharani replied carefully, that the humans have spent 2 centuries developing capabilities that we do not fully understand. President Okonkwo was quite clear. Our role is to provide intelligence and stay out of their way.
The chamber erupted in argument. Some delegates saw this as an unacceptable surrender of conclave authority. Others were too desperate to care about authority. They simply wanted the dying to stop. The debate raged back and forth, accomplishing nothing.
Finally, Prime Coordinator Thesson restored order with a brilliant flare of bioluminescence. Ambassador Valsareth, you have not yet told us the most important detail. When will the humans act? What is their timeline?
Ketharani consulted the data packet the Admiral had provided. According to President Okonkwo, the first phase of their response is already underway.
Already underway? But they would need time to mobilize, to plan, to... Coordinator. Catharani cut him off, something she would never have done before this mission. The humans have been planning this for 17 years. Their fleets began moving the moment the hegemony attacked their mining station. They have simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. She looked out at the stunned faces of the assembled delegates.
That moment is now.
The first reports came in 3 days later. A hegemony supply convoy transiting through the outer reaches had been destroyed. Not engaged, not disabled, destroyed. 17 cargo vessels and their escort of 42 warships, reduced to debris and expanding gases in less than 6 minutes. The attacking force had appeared without warning, struck with overwhelming precision, and vanished before any distress signal could be transmitted. The hegemony's response was immediate and predictable. They dispatched a hunting fleet to track down and eliminate the raiders. 300 vessels, commanded by one of their most experienced admirals, equipped with the latest weapons and sensor systems. The hunting fleet lasted 4 hours.
The reports that filtered back to the conclave were fragmentary and confused. Survivors spoke of ships appearing from empty space, their weapons cutting through hegemony defenses as if they weren't there. They spoke of coordinated attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously, each strike precisely calibrated to prevent any organized response. They spoke of the silence on human vessels. No war cries, no demands for surrender, no communication of any kind.
Just death, delivered with mechanical efficiency.
Ketharani watched the reports accumulate with a mixture of vindication and growing horror. She had seen the human ships at Station Prometheus. She had seen the discipline of their crews, the focus of their commanders, the quiet confidence that came from centuries of preparation.
She had not fully appreciated what that preparation had been for.
The hegemony's command structure began to fracture within the first week. They were accustomed to fighting enemies who could be intimidated, who would negotiate, who would eventually break under sustained pressure. The humans did none of these things. They simply kept coming, appearing in system after system, destroying everything military in nature, and then vanishing before any response could be organized.
By the end of the second week, the hegemony had lost over 2,000 vessels. Their supply lines were in chaos. Their outlying garrisons were being picked off one by one, isolated and eliminated with surgical precision. And still, the humans did not speak, did not negotiate, did not make demands. They simply killed.
The conclave received a formal communication from the hegemony on the 19th day, the first direct contact in years. The message was addressed to the full assembly, transmitted through channels that had been dead for decades.
It was a demand for explanation. The hegemony wanted to know what the conclave had unleashed upon them. They wanted to know how to make it stop. For the first time in 60 years, the masters of the hegemony of righteous expansion sounded afraid. Catharani was present when the conclave drafted its response. The debate was shorter than she had expected. There was something intoxicating about finally having leverage over the power that had tormented them for so long. The message they sent was simple. We did not unleash humanity. We simply stopped standing in their way. The hegemony's reply came 4 hours later. It was an offer of negotiation, something they had never offered before. They were willing to discuss terms, to consider territorial adjustments, to explore the possibility of peaceful coexistence. Before the conclave could even convene to discuss the offer, they received a second message. This one was from President Okonkwo. We appreciate the conclave forwarding the hegemony's communication. However, we wish to make our position clear. There will be no negotiation. There will be no territorial adjustments. There will be no peaceful coexistence with a power that has demonstrated its commitment to conquest and genocide. The hegemony will surrender unconditionally, or it will cease to exist. There are no other options. The message ended with a set of coordinates, the location of what had been the hegemony's primary fleet staging area. Had been, the message noted, until approximately 6 hours ago. Catharani stared at the coordinates, running the numbers in her mind. The staging area had been over 40 light-years from the nearest human-controlled system. It had been defended by over 1,000 vessels and multiple orbital fortresses. It had been considered impregnable by every strategic assessment the conclave had ever produced. The humans had destroyed it in a single morning. The war, if it could even be called that anymore, lasted 3 more months. The hegemony threw everything they had at stopping the human advance. They consolidated their forces, fortified their core systems, deployed weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations in a desperate attempt to slow the relentless tide. Nothing worked. The humans simply adapted. When the hegemony consolidated, the humans struck at multiple points simultaneously, forcing them to spread thin. When they fortified, the humans bypassed their defenses entirely, appearing inside their perimeters through means the conclave's scientists still could not explain. When they used weapons of mass destruction, the humans responded. Catharani tried not to think too much about what happened after the hegemony destroyed the human colony on Kepler 442b. The reports were classified at the highest levels, shared only with senior conclave officials. What she read gave her nightmares for weeks. The hegemony had killed 2 million human civilians in that attack. The humans had responded by systematically dismantling every military installation, every shipyard, every weapons factory in hegemony space. They had not killed civilians. The distinction was apparently important to them, but they had reduced the hegemony's ability to wage war to essentially 0 within 72 hours. And then they had delivered their final message. You have demonstrated that you cannot be trusted with the power to harm others. That power has been removed. You will now live under supervision until such time as you have earned the right to self-governance. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion. This is a statement of fact. Welcome to the consequences of your choices. The hegemony's government surrendered unconditionally 3 days later. Catharani stood at the observation port of the conclave's primary deliberation station, watching the stars burn their patient light into the void. Beside her, President Okonkwo stood in silence, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression thoughtful.
It had been 6 months since the hegemony's surrender. 6 months of occupation, reconstruction, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding a galaxy that had been torn apart by 60 years of conquest. The humans had proven as methodical in peace as they had been in war, deploying administrators and aid workers alongside their military forces, coordinating the liberation of occupied worlds with the same precision they had brought to battle. The Conclave had offered humanity full membership, of course, a seat at the table they had been denied for so long, integration into the galactic community as equals, or more than equals given what they had demonstrated.
The humans had declined.
"You seem troubled, Ambassador," President Okonkwo said, breaking the long silence.
I am. Processing, Catharani admitted. Much has changed in a very short time. I am still adjusting.
The President nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. Change is difficult, even necessary change, perhaps especially necessary change.
May I ask you something, President Okonkwo, something that has been troubling me since we first met?
Of course.
Catharani turned to face the human leader directly. "You could have refused to help us. After everything we did, the quarantine, the isolation, the dismissal of your people as dangerous primitives, you had every right to let us burn. Why didn't you?"
President Okonkwo was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost contemplative.
Do you know what we call our history, Ambassador? The period before we achieved spaceflight, when we were confined to a single world, fighting each other for resources and territory and ideology. I have read the reports. Your species nearly destroyed itself several times.
Nearly. The president smiled, but there was no humor in it. Always nearly. We came so close, so many times. Nuclear weapons, climate collapse, pandemics. We had every opportunity to give in, to let our worst impulses win, to simply stop struggling against our own nature.
But we didn't. And you know why?
Catharani shook her head.
Because somewhere, in every generation, there were people who refused to accept that the worst of us defined all of us. People who looked at the chaos and the cruelty and the endless cycle of violence and said, "This is not what we have to be. This is not the only choice."
We survived because we never stopped believing we could be better, even when all evidence suggested otherwise, even when it would have been easier to give up.
She turned to face Catharani directly, and there was something ancient in her eyes, something that had been forged in the fire of 1,000 years of human struggle.
"The Conclave wronged us. There's no point pretending otherwise. You feared what we were, and you tried to contain us. And in doing so, you ensured that we would develop without guidance or connection to the larger galactic community."
But you didn't destroy us. You didn't try to exterminate us before we became a threat. You simply left us alone. She smiled again, and this time there was warmth in it.
"We've been left alone before, Ambassador. By the universe, by circumstance, by our own short-sightedness. And every time we've used that solitude to become something more than we were."
Your quarantine didn't weaken us. It gave us time. Time to develop, time to plan, time to prepare for the moment when we would finally have the chance to show the galaxy who we really are.
"And who is that?" Catharani asked quietly. "Who are you, really?"
President Okonkwo turned back to the viewport, her reflection merging with the stars beyond.
We are the species that learned to turn our greatest weakness into our greatest strength. We are the species that survived ice ages and asteroid impacts and nuclear standoffs and climate collapse. We are the species that looked at a hostile universe and said, we will not go quietly into that darkness.
We are humanity, and we have learned through bitter experience that the only way to truly survive is to ensure that others survive alongside us.
She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper.
You voted to sanction us, Ambassador. 218 years ago, the Conclave gathered and decided that humanity was too dangerous, too unstable, too unpredictable to be trusted with a place in galactic society. I often wonder what those delegates would think if they could see us now, if they could see what their decision ultimately produced. Catharani felt a chill run through her. They would regret it. They would regret it with every fiber of their being.
Yes, President Okonkwo nodded slowly. Regret. That seems to be a common response lately.
She straightened, and when she spoke again, her voice had regained its formal edge. The Conclave voted to sanction humanity, Ambassador, and within minutes, from a certain perspective at least, regret spread throughout the galaxy, among those who had underestimated us, among those who had dismissed us, among those who had assumed that our violence and our chaos meant we could never amount to anything significant. But here's the thing about regret. It can be a prison, or it can be a teacher. It can trap you in endless cycles of recrimination and blame, or it can push you to become something better. She met Catharani's gaze directly.
The Conclave has a choice to make, Ambassador. You can spend the next few centuries regretting what you did to us, or you can use this as an opportunity to build something new, something better, something that includes all the species of this galaxy, even the dangerous, unstable, unpredictable ones.
Even us. Catharani felt tears forming in her secondary eyes again. You are offering us forgiveness? After everything? I'm offering you a chance. The president's voice was firm. Forgiveness is something you'll have to earn, but the chance? That's free. Take it or don't. The choice is yours. She turned and walked toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the silent observation deck. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. One more thing, Ambassador. The hegemony thought they could frighten us into submission. They thought that because we were young and isolated, we would be easy to intimidate. They were wrong. But the Conclave made a different mistake. You thought we could be ignored. You thought that by containing us, you could prevent us from becoming a factor in galactic affairs. You were wrong, too. Her eyes seemed to pierce through Catharani's soul. Remember that, Ambassador. Remember it when the next crisis comes, and the next. Remember it when you encounter new species, strange and frightening and full of potential. Remember what happens when you try to contain something that was meant to grow. And maybe, next time, you'll make a different choice. She departed, leaving Catharani alone with the stars. The Velkari ambassador stood at the viewport for a long time, watching the ancient lights burn their patient illumination into the void. She thought about the centuries of history that had led to this moment, the decisions made by beings long dead, the consequences that had rippled across generations, the chances missed and opportunities squandered. She thought about the humans, isolated and abandoned, building their fleets in the darkness while the galaxy burned around them. She thought about their patience, their discipline, their terrifying calm in the face of annihilation.
She thought about the restraint they had shown, could have destroyed everything, could have remade the galaxy in their own image, but had instead chosen to rebuild what others had broken.
She thought about the vote 218 years ago, when the Conclave had decided that humanity was too dangerous to be trusted.
They had been right, in a way. Humanity was dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever produced. But danger, she was beginning to understand, was not the same as evil. And the most dangerous beings in the universe might also be the ones most capable of protecting it. The stars continued to burn, patient and eternal, casting their light into the void, and Catharani Val Soreth, for the first time in 4 centuries, allowed herself to feel something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. The vote had been cast, the sanctions had been imposed, and within minutes, from a certain cosmic perspective, regret had spread across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. But regret was not the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of something new. Something human. And that, Catharani realized, was perhaps the most terrifying and the most wonderful thing of all. In the silence of the observation deck, surrounded by the ancient light of 1 billion suns, she began to understand why the humans had survived when so many others had fallen. It was not their violence, though they were capable of extraordinary violence. It was not their technology, though their technology was formidable. It was not even their unity, though they had achieved a level of coordination that elder species could barely comprehend. It was their refusal to accept that anything was impossible. They had looked at a universe that seemed determined to destroy them, and they had said, "No, not today, not ever. We will find a way, or we will make one." And they had. Against every odd, against every obstacle, against every force that sought to contain or diminish or destroy them, the humans had endured. They had grown. They had become something that the old reports could never have predicted, not because they had changed their fundamental nature, but because they had finally been given the chance to show what that nature was truly capable of. The Conclave had voted to sanction humanity out of fear. Fear of their violence, their chaos, their unpredictable nature. Fear of what they might become if allowed to develop without restraint. But the humans had shown that the opposite of fear was not courage. The opposite of fear was understanding. They had understood, perhaps better than any other species in the galaxy, that survival was not enough, that mere existence was not the goal, that the point of enduring was to become something worthy of the struggle it required. And they had extended that understanding to the very civilizations that had sought to contain them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. That would come later, if it came at all. But the chance to earn it. The opportunity to grow beyond past mistakes. The same gift that the universe had given them, passed on to those who had tried to deny it. It was, Catharani thought, the most human thing imaginable. And it was, she was beginning to realize, exactly what the galaxy needed. The stars burned on, patient and eternal, watching over a universe that was slowly, painfully beginning to learn a lesson that humanity had learned long ago. That the darkness was not the enemy, that struggle was not the curse, that the things that seemed most likely to destroy us were often the things that made us strongest, and that sometimes the species you feared the most turned out to be the ones you needed the most. The vote had been cast. The regret had spread. But in the end, from the ashes of that regret, something new was growing. Something hopeful.
Something human.
And the stars, ancient and patient, continued to burn their light into the void, illuminating the path forward for all those brave enough to walk it. The journey was far from over. The work of rebuilding would take generations. The wounds of the past would heal slowly, if they healed at all.
But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had something it had almost forgotten existed.
A future worth believing in. And humanity, terrifying and wonderful and endlessly, impossibly resilient, would be there to help build it. Not because they had to, but because that's who they were. That's who they had always been. And that's who they would always be. Forever